adjusts insurance rates based on safe driving habits. Now that's Progressive. Learn more at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:06. Time for KUOW's Week in Review.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke, and I love that we can get together here at the end of every week. And I have my hands going up to my temples. I guess that's me acting out the idea of what happened this week and what does this all mean? And I don't do it alone. I bring together journalist friends and we commiserate as one. I can see my partners on the screen here because we're streaming this on YouTube and Facebook. So you can go there if you like, search KUOW Public Radio and you can wave to us. Not that we'll wave back, but we might. You never know. Brian Callanan from Seattle Channel is waving. Brian, good to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming.
Great to be here, Bill. Thanks.
We also have independent journalist Jane Hu. Jane, welcome back to the show. Waving also. Nice to see you. What's that?
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. And KUOW reporter and newscaster Paige Browning. Thanks a lot, Paige, for coming on.
Happy to be here.
So did any of you see the so-called string of pearls? It's cloudy right now, but earlier this week, it was clear enough to see 60 SpaceX satellites that were just launched on Tuesday. I don't suppose anybody was looking up at the time.
I wish that I had because it sounded awesome, but just the backstory on this, Bill, is so interesting to me. We've been having a few of these kind of sightings recently. I remember end of March, the SpaceX rocket actually deposited some junk that was flying through the atmosphere, and a lot of people in Seattle and Portland saw that, which happens, I guess. But a chunk of it actually, or a few chunks of it landed in the central Washington area. One of them actually came close to a house. So I'm super cool with satellites flying in the air. Sounds great. Sounds like a lot of fun, but take care of your space junk. And I will say, Bill, I did check. Space junk is already a band name, so that's not happening. And I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
Jane, are you super cool with the many satellites now? I mean, they're planning just SpaceX alone. I think is eventually going to have more than 1,000 satellites up there.
Right. Yeah. I am glad I'm not the only person who's pushing for caution here because I was afraid I was going to be the only naysayer. I did not catch the satellites myself, but I'm in an Aurora Borealis hunters group for Washington State. And so many people posted pictures of that being like, what is this? I did a story a few years ago about space junk, but also just using the sky as kind of a canvas for things. Like there is a company that sells basically packages for families to shoot their loved ones' remains into the sky and turn them into shooting stars. Like there are other people talking about making ads in space. And I'm just worried that Musk is really setting a precedent for cluttering orbit around Earth and that our night sky is going to be full of just random human junk from now on.
Jane, I'm going to join you on this because part of me is like, wow, that's amazing to see. We're seeing the future in our skies. And the other part of me is a big fan of dark sky reserves and being able to, have astronomical societies see a clear pitch black sky. And if we're going to see satellites dotting the sky, there's going to be fewer reserves potentially. So,
yep. They're trying to, SpaceX has painted some satellites with an anti-reflective coating, but it's not 100% helpful.
Not convinced.
No, neither are the astronomers. Okay, well, I thought the string of satellites that I saw video of looked like Santa's reindeers, but that's that was the cool part for me, for the child in me. And before we leave that topic and really bear down and get into the news of the week, I just want to ask Jane, Aurora Borealis Hunters of Washington State.
That's awesome.
I don't remember the exact
hunt is on.
Group, but it's an open group. So if folks want to join, it's a great one.
Do you see it from Washington State if you go to the mountains or something?
You can. So, I mean, like Paige was talking about, you just need dark skies, which is hard from Seattle, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's illuminate the news here on Week in Review. Let's shine the light of 1,000 satellites onto this week. On the pandemic front, the Governor Inslee had set these markers, these maximum amounts of COVID cases and hospitalizations, and we had been warned last week, warned that we had exceeded those maximums, and so King County and other counties we're going to have to go backward again on restricting indoor dining and other gatherings. And then on Tuesday, Governor Inslee surprised us.
The most recent data that has come in just in the last few days shows a potential plateauing of the COVID activity in the state of Washington, which obviously is good news.
Not a plateauing, a potential plateauing, meaning COVID cases have not come down. They just might, which is sort of changing the rules. Paige, do you think this phased approach is working and making sense to the public?
I think from my view, the phases serve a purpose. I can see an argument for continuing to use this approach in Washington. Our rates of COVID have been, better than a lot of states. The fact is, we still have people going to the hospital, though. We still have people who are dying weekly or daily from COVID in Washington. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't want to see that grow. But what I would say is, if the phases are going to stick around, I want to see a really clear message around what is allowed in the state and what's not. Because, just as we heard in that clip, a potential plateauing, it's like, I just feel like my head is whipping back and forth between what phase are we in? Is it 25% capacity, 50%? Can I go to this cafe, theater? Mm-hmm. It's confusing. And I'm a journalist, so I don't know what it's like for the public. So that's what I would say. If we're sticking with phases, make it clear.
Well, and I just saw, Paige, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's one of those situations where I think the governor is trying to say, let's be flexible. He said that a few times in his news conference as well. And I'm really looking at what appears to be a balance here, because I know that our state health secretary, Umer Shah, talked about this, balancing health, virus distribution, and getting real about virus fatigue too, and going through all these different phases and whatever else. I think we're seeing this in our state and at a national level too, because some other states, as you know, are opening fully, like New York. Is this a virus that's going to be with us for a long time? I think it is. And you have to be real about that. We have some variants that are spreading quickly, vaccination really not moving quickly enough to get us to herd immunity. So now it's time to really manage this crisis, I think. So can we make sure we're inoculating the most vulnerable? Can we cut back on those hospital cases and deaths? I think that's where the focus is really going to go now. I know we're talking locally about Pierce County being ticked off about this, but I think there's a lot still ahead when it comes to managing this crisis. And I feel like that's what we're going to hear more about going forward.
Yeah, I say this more, not so much as a journalist, but just as something I notice about myself and have been during the pandemic is some rule follower in me, my military father, or something kind of feels comforted by the idea that the governor, has his hands on a dial and keeps adjusting and reacting every week. I know other people feel like that's confusing and annoying, and so I'm just adding to the multiplicity of completely subjective reactions to this kind of thing. Yeah. There was definitely a subjective reaction from the Pierce County executive this week, as you mentioned. Pierce County got knocked backward to phase 2 restrictions 3 weeks ago because it had too many cases and hospitalizations. And the county executive, Bruce Dameyer, says, yeah, Inslee this week did the right thing by pausing everybody else's restriction tightening. But what about Pierce County?
I don't think anybody should be rolled back. I don't think Pierce County should have been rolled back 3 weeks ago. I don't think King County should be rolled back. We need to focus on moving forward, not rolling backward. I think we're clearly entering what I would call the final phase of the emergency of COVID.
Yeah, and as we've said, focusing on getting people vaccinated. Jane, you've been following the efforts to make that more accessible, just easier to do.
Yeah, I think that given that we're trying to just open up spaces for people to get vaccinated, I know I got a text from UW the other day saying that they're closing the reservation system, but that they are going to have walk-ins available. I'm thinking about how, even a month or 6 weeks ago, for a lot of folks I know who were really eager to get vaccinated, that would have been a dream. Like, people were clamoring for appointments. And it does feel like we're moving into a different phase of vaccination, where we're thinking about, well, how do we reach people who haven't yet gotten vaccinated, and why haven't they gotten vaccinated? How do we talk to them about that?
Yeah, and we've seen the city of Seattle do that too, Jane. I've seen a number of different teams going to Dick's Drive-In, for goodness sakes, and working on getting people inoculated. You got to go where the people are, right? So I think it's an outreach where, instead of waiting for people to come in, different agencies are reaching out and saying, come on our way. Kaiser Permanente, for example, saying, everybody come on down. Doesn't matter if you're a member or not. I think it's about getting shots in the arms right now. At least that's what the governor would say.
Yeah.
Even with
Yeah.
Go
Oh, I was
on,
gonna
please.
say, I think that a large part of it is not, I guess part of it is definitely trying to make sure that people have access to it if they want it. But I know that there are still people who have questions about the vaccine. And I think it's really important that we really get to the root of why folks have not gotten vaccinated and to make sure that correct information is out there about that.
Well, we sure didn't act like it was going to take that kind of effort back when it was all about, when the vaccine finally arrives. But now we're getting into, trying to figure out the individual objections and getting to people where they are. I like this image of Dick's Drive-In.
Right.
I'm imagining this
part of the combo deal or something. Yeah.
Right. We're just finding people who have to be paused long enough that you could put a needle in their arm. Like we could, when traffic is returning, we can just go to I-5 over the Ship Canal Bridge and go window to window. And Paige, there have also been incentives. There's that sort of flip side of it is ways to encourage people to do it.
Yeah. And I feel like I've kind of seen some people roll their eyes at these incentives. Like, really, the way you're getting people to a vaccine site is by giving a free hot dog. But I'm kind of the mindset, why not more incentives? 45% of adults in our state haven't started the vaccination process with coronavirus vaccines. So any way that we can get people to them, the quicker the better, I think. If it's a hot dog, a free coffee, a discount on something, that sounds good enough to me. And the other part of these incentives is, I think, it's been really hard to find things to celebrate in the past year. And once I feel like I'm past my second shot, I want to celebrate. I want to go get a free beer at the brewery because I've made it. So I'm all for it.
I was going to say, Bill, the incentives that are going on, the Mariners, I just got an email from them today as we're taping the show saying, hey, we've got our vaccination section open. I think, to your point, Paige, this is part of what the governor's trying here with this pause, really pushing for the vaccinations and adding that economic lever. It's like, hey, want to get involved here? Guess what? Here's a special spot for you. So having those businesses come on board and provide that economic lever, as it were, I'm thinking that's going to help with this process to get people vaccinated.
Do you think something like a special vaccination section is going to be a hit with Mariner fans or alienate Mariner fans or both? That this idea of, I need to show my official documentation, that whole resentment about having to carry around justification.
There are still sections for people who are not vaccinated. So it's important to point that out. But I think it's that incentive, at least from the Mariners' point of view. They can get a lot more people in the seats right now. So from their standpoint, they're saying, bring it on. This is going to mean more dollars in. They could get up to 22,000 people in that park. I've been to a couple games already this year, and they have a sellout crowd, and like people are separated by rows away from you. It's really, really weird. So I think the Mariners would like to see that. I think you'll see other businesses coming on board with this as well.
Yeah. And I think, to your question, Bill, we probably will see some people really irritated by this. Like, come on, I've got to show you my vaccine card just so I can sit in the stands. But what I think will be interesting is when we see smaller venues potentially try this out. Like, I'm picturing going to a concert at Numos, and there's like, is there a vaccine only section there in this small location? And who gets the seats close, the area closer to the stage?
Right.
So,
where's that section? Is it the good seats?
Right.
Before we had the vaccines, I guess back in the fall, there's a lot of talk about vaccine passports. And I think increasingly we're seeing that people are probably not going to be super thrilled to have to show their vaccine card everywhere they go. But I think we've landed in this place that's kind of interesting where, you'll be incentivized perhaps with extra perks or just, a better spot at Numos, or I would totally be into that. I'm short and I can never see over people's heads there.
Nice.
But I think it's just interesting that we've moved into this phase now where it's those vaccination, they're not passports per se, but more just, kind of a VIP pass in a way.
And college campuses campuses too. I mean, that's a big piece of it as well. All these college campuses around the Northwest are saying you got to be vaccinated to come to class here in the fall. So I think we're seeing it from a lot of different angles in terms of these incentives to get people vaccinated somehow.
And the next incentive will be TikTok accounts, because the Pfizer vaccine is supposed to be authorized for kids age 12 to 15. Any one of these weeks, maybe next week. We talked with Cynthia Dold at UW Medicine, who said parents are going to be able to book appointments for their kids immediately. You don't even need an appointment. You can walk the kids in spontaneously.
I'm personally excited, as I've got a 12-year-old, so I can't wait to bring him in. And I'd say there's just a ton of buzz in the community to get this younger set vaccinated.
When I say immediately, you'll be able to book once that authorization comes, and a parent can give consent in person, on the phone, online. And there are now studies underway to evaluate the vaccine safety for children as young as 6 months. So we'll see. Sort of related to this week, KUOW, by the way, I'll just re-identify what we're doing here. This is Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke, and I'm with Jane C. Hu, an independent journalist. Brian Callanan is host and producer at Seattle Channel, and Paige Browning is KUOW reporter and newscaster. So we're talking about the news of the week. And this week, KUOW checked in on a neighborhood that's trying to recover from the pandemic. This was reporter Ruby DeLuna going to Seattle's Chinatown International District, where she says there's more foot traffic on King Street than there was a year ago. Most of the storefronts that were boarded up last year have shed their plywood. She talked with Jamie Lee of the Seattle Chinatown International District Preservation Development Authority, and also with one of the owners of Susu Dessert Bar, Katie Pohl.
Poll wonders whether they'll be able to welcome customers inside.
We really want to be open for dine-in by the summer, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
For now, she and other businesses are trying to make the most of the positive changes, the good weather, people venturing out after vaccination, and the ongoing support for local businesses. COVID isn't the only looming issue. Ongoing violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have put people here on edge.
Some folks are afraid to go out, to walk the streets at night.
Lee and community members are trying to figure out how to help people in the neighborhood feel safe. It means asking some hard questions.
How do we help our residents feel safe without necessarily asking for more police? How do we take safety into our own hands and do it in a way that's conducive for our residents, but also doesn't increase in a system of repression?
One thing is certain. Lee says recovery will take time, maybe even longer than the last recession. It's not going to be like flipping a switch.
Okay, that was KUOW's Ruby DeLuna in Chinatown International District. There's a lot in there. Jane, you've reported on some of this yourself. Why are neighborhoods like the ID trying to feel safe without police in some cases?
Yeah, I think that there's a concern that more police presence does not necessarily lead to more safety for the individuals in that neighborhood, and in fact could lead to more incidents like we've seen over the last, forever really, but that we've been especially paying attention to over the last year or two of police violence. I know that in the ID, it feels like like you said, there's a lot going on there. Economically too, it just feels like there's a 1-2 punch of the pandemic, but also just racism over time, right? I know that just from reporting on this, historically, every time that there is any kind of major disease floating around, Asians often get scapegoated for this. And then often the kind of main target of that hatred ends up being these majority Asian neighborhoods like the ID. So in the late 1800s and 1900s, public health departments up and down the West Coast accused Asians of bringing everything from leprosy to malaria to the bubonic plague. And then if you were looking in Toronto in 2003 during the SARS outbreak, people also avoided Chinatowns. So I think that it's going to be a challenge to kind of recover economically, but also to ensure the safety of folks in that area. And I know that there has been some neighborhood efforts for that. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, I know there was a group that was really just trying to convince people to patronize restaurants in the ID. And that there's also a neighborhood watch group that is trying to be a community alternative to police presence. where they just basically walk around every night. They are trying to do outreach to homeless folks. They're just trying to be a presence in the neighborhood and deter violence by being there.
Yeah, that neighborhood watch group is so interesting to look at, Jane. I've talked a little bit about this too in some of my work, and I've seen them actually go out and connect with different elders in the Chinatown ID just to help them to get where they want to go because they're scared. They're scared about walking the streets there. And that's a really important point of this as we move forward and as we try to recover from COVID. I think some neighborhoods are going to recover more quickly than others. I think that's very fair to say. But I think also we're going to keep a close eye on where's the city investing money? Where's the county investing money? They've talked about putting millions into the Chinatown ID as a way to fight back against AAPI hate. It's a very important thing, but where that money is going is not necessarily towards more police presence. It's going to these groups that are actually helping this cause. So watching where those investments grow, watching where the Chinatown ID neighborhood goes over the next couple of months here, it's going to be really important to watch that community effort here. And I think it's a really, really important point of this, that racism that undercuts all of this is something that we all have to fight.
And I think, just to jump in, it'll be a failure of the city in some ways if the Chinatown International District continues to struggle in the months to come. And once we get on the other side of the pandemic, because this neighborhood is so representative of so many things this year: the coronavirus pandemic, racism and hate crimes, and small businesses, which are dotted all around this neighborhood versus, behemoth corporations that some of them have done really well. There's just so much rich about this neighborhood. And like you were saying, Brian, about the money, that they're going to need it to really come out of this successfully. And it says a lot about the Chinatown ID that it says a lot about the character of this neighborhood, that they band together as a community to make it safe, not relying solely on city resources like a lot of neighborhoods do. Yeah.
We know that increase in hate crimes is real, and the concerns with small businesses is real. And there are so many different kinds of small businesses in Chinatown ID in any neighborhood. Does anyone expect, just on the topic of people going to indoor dining when they're allowed to, do we? I guess I had kind of always assumed that when safety aside, assuming people feel safe enough and restaurants are fully open, that restaurant patronage would snap back to where it was, a year ago in the ID. Is that naive? Is that what the business people are expecting there?
I don't know if it's going to be a snapback type of situation there, Bill. I get the feeling that this is going to happen over the course of time. COVID and its impacts are going to be with us for years. And I think we're going to see that in neighborhoods like the Chinatown ID. Business is part of it. This different racism is part of it too. So you have to keep an eye on that. I think it gets to a certain comfort level for people who want to go out. I think a lot of people are itching to do that. I think you're onto something there. But getting to that part where we're all jammed into the restaurant together, I don't know. I think that's really going to take some time before people are completely comfortable with that.
Yeah, I agree with Brian there. I think it's going to take a while for people to slide back into any kind of routine where they feel comfortable with that. I hit my full vaccination earlier this week and was thinking, well, what should I do? Like, could I go eat in a restaurant? And I just realized that I did not feel ready, even though, I feel pretty protected. And I know that the restaurants I like to go to are all taking the necessary precautions and are following guidelines. I just feel like I need a few more weeks to get used to my newly vaccinated status, get used to that before I want to actually go through with that. So I imagine a lot of folks might be feeling the same way.
Yeah, you got to start with like some face touching and then move on. Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
I was just going to say, part of me is glad that, we're starting to get vaccinated as the months are getting warmer. So some of that easing back in can still include patios and, enjoying restaurants and businesses outside for the first phase of vaccination.
We're going to pick up with the news in just a moment here. We'll take a quick pause on the Week in Review, which you are hearing with me, Bill Radke. We've got KUOW's Paige Browning, Jane Hu is here, Brian Callanan is here, and you can also see the gang because we're up on YouTube and Facebook. So just search KUOW Public Radio and come join us that way. We will continue with the big stories of the week in just a moment.
Support for KUOW comes from the University of Washington. A decade ago, the University of Washington launched the Be Boundless fundraising campaign with the goal of helping change the world. Since then, donors have contributed to causes and projects they care about to realize that goal. uw.edu/boundless.
Hi, I'm Chris Morgan, host of the Wild podcast. Join me for a special virtual event Thursday, May 13th on KUOW's YouTube and Facebook to celebrate Season 3 of The Wild and talk with wildlife ecologist Dr. Ray Wynn Grant. We'll explore how we can all enjoy, protect, and make wild places more accessible to everyone. Spoiler alert, there may be a lot of talk about bears too. I hope you'll join us. RSVP and learn more at kuow.org/events.
It's 48 degrees in Seattle. The forecast is for showers and possibly a thunderstorm this afternoon with a high in the mid-50s. 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:33, and it's KUOW's Week in Review.
Your friendly panel of journalists this week, Jane C. Hu is with us, KUOW's Paige Browning, and the Seattle Channel's Brian Callanan. I'm Bill Radke. This week, a Seattle City Council committee met to discuss bringing more homeless people into hotel rooms. Last week, King County announced a new $100 million plan that may include buying more hotels to use as shelter space. Hotels have shown proven success in transitioning people into housing, but they're expensive. And with summer approaching and more people being vaccinated, the demand for hotel rooms is rising as well. Daily visitors to Seattle are up nearly 40% from February. Brian, Seattle now has a couple of hotels open for homeless people. They're looking for a third to partner with. What do you see as the big challenges to the city buying or leasing more hotels to combat homelessness?
There's a lot going on here, Bill. The city and county were really talking about this at the early part of the pandemic, but figuring out contracts for these hotel shelters, getting service providers to fully staff them, that's taken a really long time. The city had hoped to announce a third hotel shelter space this week. That did not come through. It looks like this is going to happen in the next couple months, hopefully before the end of the year, but we're going to have to see how this issue transitions. We've got a growing economy. We'll see how that happens as we emerge from COVID. On the flip side of this, though, this pandemic has actually shut down a number of hotels in our area. So there is a possibility the city and county could jump in there, purchase some of those hotels on a long-term basis there with some of the federal funding that's coming in right now. We'll see what happens on that score. The challenge, though, are these continuing costs, maintaining the social programs that go with these hotel rooms. This is very expensive, but the studies do show hotels have done a great job at transitioning people into housing. So will hotels be a part of the sustainable program to respond to homelessness going forward? It's really hard to say, but I think the lasting lesson of COVID is this old congregate model of putting a bunch of people in a room that has bunk beds and calling it a shelter. It's not a healthy option, and it has not been as successful as hotels or tiny houses have proven to be in Seattle in terms of transitioning people into housing. So these non-congregate options that's what we're going to see more of in the post-pandemic future.
Would you say a little more about why it is that that a room seems to bring more success in transitioning people to housing?
I think there's the dignity and the privacy of it, Bill. People are able to lock up their stuff there. Theft among homeless people who live on the street is terrible, very high. So they're able to lock up their stuff in a space there. They're able to do that in a tiny house village as well. But in a hotel room, they've not only got their space, they also have an attached bathroom. So the hygiene issues that are involved there, it's all contained in that one room. So I think those hotels have shown a lot of good promise there because they are a more dignified option and they bring people in such a way that it makes sense. Oh, okay, now I'm going to transition into a more permanent type of housing.
Jane, sometimes I'm thinking of Renton now. There will be community pushback when new shelters to house homeless people open. The hotel situation happened at the Red Lion in Renton. What's that about, and where do you think that issue is going?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. I know up here in close to Aurora in North Seattle, I know that there have been complaints as well. And I feel like some of that pushback could be legitimate. Some of that pushback, though, I think is really just driven by fear or a fundamental misunderstanding of who becomes homeless and why. And until we can just have better discussions about, what is it that how do we actually talk with our homeless neighbors and understand what they want and need? Like Bill, when you were asking, why is it that hotel rooms might be a good solution here? I was just thinking about, well, what would I want? Would I want to be in a crowded room with a bunch of other people, or would I want my own space? Like when I travel or when I go somewhere where I don't already have shelter, what do I want? And I think that is not, I think a lot of people think of homeless folks as someone else. But this has happened to so many of our neighbors as housing prices have risen, especially over the course of the pandemic, as people have lost work and often lost homes. I think really just realizing that, a lot of these people continue to be our neighbors.
And Jane, I'm glad you brought up the price of housing in general. I wanted to ask you, Paige, about the effect of using up hotel space on, is there an effect there on the desire to just make more places for people to stay around here?
My thought about this is if we don't have as much hotel space to meet the demand of potential tourists, okay, then those tourists go to Airbnbs. So is that going to make more housing into, short-term rentals, vacation homes, instead of long-term rentals? So maybe that's part of the equation. I'm not sure if it's a large part, but I could see that being an argument talked about, say, in city council or county council, that, there are a lot of neighbors who don't want their neighborhood or their condo building to turn into just an Airbnb location. So maybe that's a factor.
Yeah. I was going to say, though, I mean, the city has been working on this issue to bring 300 units of hotel rooms online for some time now. They're not at that level yet. They're not even close to that level of 300 rooms. So I think there's going to be an effort to continue with this hotel push, at least for a few more months, to see if they can get to that point. But it is fraught. You're absolutely right, Paige, when you talk about what's going on here. There's a lot of different pressures from different parts of the community, and we'll see where the pressure comes economically, too, as more people come back into Seattle as tourists.
Brian, we've heard about all the federal assistance passed by Congress, tens of billions for housing and homelessness assistance. Is that a game changer for the Seattle area or not?
I think it could be. I think over the next couple of weeks and months, we're going to be hearing the city council talk about ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. Where's that money going to go? They have $239 million of that money coming in. They're going to be working it in halves, basically, $119 million this year, $119 next year. So where's that money best spent? A lot of the money they've been talking about right now has been in kind of emergency response to COVID, making sure that we're getting vaccines in arms, things of that nature. Now I think it's going to be that transition, helping different neighborhoods get back on the level. I think of neighborhoods like the Chinatown ID. I think of downtown as well. How do we help these small businesses get back on their feet and stable once we get out of the pandemic mode here? How are they going to do that? Can we help people who are small business owners? Can we help people who rent? Can we help people who are landlords too? I think we're going to see some game-changing possibilities there. And also what investments are going to be made in homeless people as well. There's a lot of different pieces here. I think making those investments in hotels is a potential part of this, but really it's just one piece of the solution that has to be a lot larger.
When we continue with the Week in Review, we're going to go to the sunny side of the state, and we're also going to touch on the high-profile divorce that we all got tweeted about this week, and reasons to smile always. Stay tuned for Week in Review. We're going to be right back.
I'm Paul Henley, host of BBC NewsHour. On today's programme, the rapid spread of COVID in India from cities to rural areas. And the new hope offered to poorer countries fighting the virus as the World Health Organization approves China's Sinopharm vaccine.
Those stories and a whole lot more. BBC NewsHour is about 19 minutes away. It begins this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Support for KUOW comes from ArchBright, offering training to close critical skills gaps, develop workplace leaders, and build employee engagement. Virtual classes available for individual enrollment or as private team trainings. Details and more at archbright.com.
We have reached 50 degrees in Seattle on our way to a high of 56. Forecast is for showers this afternoon and possibly a thunderstorm. 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:41, and it's KUOW's Week in Review.
You're learning what happened this week and maybe what it all means on Week in Review. I'm your host, Bill Radke, with my colleague, reporter, newscaster Paige Browning of KUOW, Seattle Channel host and producer Brian Callanan, and independent journalist Jane C. Hu, and we are all visible. Transparency online. If you want to go to YouTube or Facebook and see how lovely we are on the outside. There is a new debate brewing between rural, redder parts of Washington state and the more urban, bluer parts. Washington has promised to eliminate fossil fuels from our electricity generation in 25 years. Eliminating fossil fuels from the process of making electricity. Well, a major way to do that is solar farms, the giant swaths of rows and rows of solar panels. Well, where do those go? They go where it's sunny on the east side of the state. The biggest solar project in the state, 1,800 acres of solar panels, is being planned in Goldendale in south central Washington, and there is a backlash there. Northwest News Network correspondent Courtney Flatt took us to the opposition in Goldendale.
Every Thursday, activists line Goldendale's Columbus Avenue. Their bright yellow signs shout, "Stop Solar Farms," the same slogan that lines fences near where the potential solar project could be built.
Hello, I signed your petition and everything.
Greg Wagner founded CEASE, Citizens Educated About Solar Energy, to oppose the project that could land in his backyard.
They do all these different environmental protection studies. I mean, it's plants and it's birds, but they never do a human impact. They never look at how it's going to hurt the people that have to live around these things.
So, Paige Browning, what do these Washingtonians? We got a whiff of it there, but could you say more about what some people don't like about solar farms?
Oh gosh, there's a list probably already, even though these are just really starting to come online in a big way. But I would say part of this is that there's not a total widespread acceptance that we need to transition to solar and wind. The climate scientists say we've got to do it, but there's just not this widespread acceptance. Also, this is sort of a change in the way of life or work for people who this has been farmland for decades, maybe centuries, and they're going to change the landscape. What does it mean for wildlife? They have concerns about property values. And just this idea that, it's Seattle Democrats, Western Washington Democrats telling us what to do with our land. I'd say, that sort of captures at least the concerns that I've seen about turning it over to solar.
Yeah, and I look at that piece that you mentioned there, Paige. This is a power struggle, I guess, in every sense of the term there when you look at it, because you've got policy decisions coming from the west side. Governor Jay Inslee, relatively popular over here, but the energy resource of the sun and wind is more plentiful in east and central Washington, where the governor is a lot less popular. So the really big clash I see coming up ahead, state law actually gives the option for these green energy developers to go through a state council review process. And that basically gives the governor the power to push these projects through, even if county officials are in opposition, which they have been in some different cases here. So I know that these solar projects, they have their critics. They can turn into big payoffs for some farmers out there who might need that. So this is a really interesting one. And it has an impact in Seattle, too. I wanted to point out Seattle City Light is using more solar and wind power. More people are conserving, too. That's led to wholesale power prices actually around the state dropping steadily over the past couple of years. So we have a scheduled rate increase coming up next year for City Light, but this is something to keep an eye on, how these numbers are changing in the years ahead when you got more solar, more wind coming online.
I think to also complicate this a little bit, I think it's easy to paint it as an east side, west side thing. And I'm not saying that you all are definitely doing that here, but I do think it's important to point out that there are also plenty of folks who are in Eastern Washington in these communities who want this. Those who are finding it difficult to maintain their crop every year and think that these new renewable sources of energy could be great profits for them in terms of leasing the land. And I've done some reporting on Wyoming and the debates over wind farms there. And I think it could be an interesting preview of what might be coming to Washington. Kind of going back to what Paige was saying about just the aesthetic change of the land, but also just, a change in the way of living. I know there was one city council person I talked to there who said that, like oil, gas, and coal have been such a huge part of Wyoming culture that people feel like wind energy is almost like cheating on your wife. That was just such an evocative quote. But I think that there is just going to have to be a big cultural shift for folks to accept that this might be what could bring in income in that part of the state from now on.
And we've been such a state that relies on hydropower for so long. And seeing this new part of the portfolio come in, it's I think it's been tough for a lot of the different power brokers around our area to deal with too. This is something new, it's different, and like you say, it's not something that we're completely used to.
When it comes to wind farms, Jane, isn't one of the objections that it's dangerous to birds? And is that something that can be mitigated?
Yeah, I think that's a very common criticism, just talking about destruction to the land or threats to wildlife, but it's actually pretty complicated. So wind can, of course, be damaging to birds, but if you actually look at the statistics, cats and birds colliding with buildings are actually much more likely causes of death for these birds. So if you all know Audubon, which I kind of think of as like the bird organization, they actually are in support of wind farms. I guess in terms of also native habitats, of course, there are always trade-offs in thinking about what we want to do with the land and how it changes how the landscape looks, but also what the ecosystem is like. But I think a lot of folks are talking about how to mitigate those effects, like potentially putting solar panels or wind turbines in areas where it's already developed, like places that are farms currently. But of course, that's not zero impact. And then one more thing that I'll mention is that I think there are also ways to mitigate the potential effect of wind turbines on birds. So like one simple proposal that's been put out there that actually was backed up by a study a few years ago is that if you paint turbines black, it seems like they are more visible to birds and they are less likely to run into them. I think this needs to be tested on a much larger scale, obviously, and I don't know if there are other drawbacks, but it seems like there are definitely ways people are already thinking about mitigating some of these potential negatives.
Yeah, wow.
Paint it black, which brings us back to satellites from the beginning of the show. Yes, Paige.
I was just going to say that, I think we're seeing this happen right now in, Eastern Washington and Central Washington. I think this is going to come to Western Washington eventually, where we're also seeing opposition here. I mean, when we hear from climate scientists and climate policy wonks, they say we have to go big on wind energy and solar energy. I mean, huge on wind and solar to really get a grip on the climate crisis. And that could mean putting solar in state or federal property that maybe is forest land now. I mean, I'm not seeing this proposed, but there could be points where Western Washington folks or people on the other side of the state who are supportive of solar and wind, there might be some things that make them uncomfortable too. So to make this push really happen, the proponents, they've got to get the public buy-in from all walks of life.
Okay, so we are getting close to the end of the show. I just want to make sure we have time to talk about the big split that we heard about. Yeah. So this is Week in Review. That was a bit of the solar and wind farm debate here in Washington State. Final topic is that this week, one of the people I follow on Twitter posted, quote, "After a great deal of thought and a lot of work on our relationship, we have made the decision to end our marriage. Over the last 27 years, we have raised 3 incredible children and built a foundation that works all over the world to enable all people to lead healthy, productive lives. We continue to share a belief in that mission and will continue our work together at the foundation, but we no longer believe we can grow together as a couple in this next phase of our lives." Melinda Gates and Bill Gates. And had a reaction or two. I wonder about you, Brian. How did you? What went through your mind when you heard the news?
Well, the only point of comparison I can really think of with this is 2019 when Jeff Bezos split from his wife, Mackenzie Scott, and she immediately started donating to a number of different philanthropic causes. But that couple, when they split, really didn't have the philanthropic reach that Bill and Melinda Gates do, clearly. So I think Melinda Gates, from what I understand of that foundation, really does get involved with the decisions that are involved that happen there. And I get the feeling that if she wants to make any changes to what this foundation does, it's going to involve a lot of time and planning. But I really think this is one of those stories where it is certainly something personal. I'm sorry that it happened, but I also look at this as something that really could affect a lot of things. When I think about philanthropy, when I think about public policy and how that's impacted by these dollars that's coming in, this is potentially something really big we're talking about here.
Other reactions?
I think some of the thoughts that I've formed this week actually came from an interview I did with Dina Bass of Bloomberg News. She's a tech reporter and basically helped me understand why this question about what Melinda is going to do next is actually sort of ridiculous. I mean, she's like a well-established philanthropist, author, raised children that are now adults. And we already know what she's into. And mostly the big topic that she's going toward is gender equality work worldwide. And so I just thought that was an interesting reaction that I've been seeing, all over, social media. What's Melinda gonna do? It's Melinda
Paige,
Gates.
What's
Hot
the
Girl
ridiculous
Summer.
part? What's the behind that
there's
reaction?
a question of what's Melinda going to do next? Where's her focus going to be? Like we saw with the Bezos divorce, there was a question to what is Miss Mackenzie Scott going to spend her time on? That question's been applied to Melinda Gates, but we already know what her passions are.
I see. How about you, Jane?
My first reaction was just wondering if she was going to go the way of Mackenzie Scott and dropping a long list of especially smaller local organizations that she was going to donate to. I mean, I think just another billionaire in the neighborhood seems like not a bad thing. They obviously have a strong track record of philanthropy, and like Paige says, I expect that to continue.
Because I'm not very smart about how global philanthropy works, my reaction had to do with just thinking about marriage and how I went into it with it was part romance, but also if you're planning kids, you're also I basically was choosing someone to start my charitable foundation with, right? The Radke Bowen Foundation is charity dedicated to making sure
they give.
We give to make sure 3 children have access to vaccinations, education, healthcare, food security. And so in the Gates case, who, obviously I don't know. I mean, their divorce is sort of is meaningless to everybody but them at this point, because we don't know what's going to happen and it's their business. But I imagine as their kids are growing up, that Melinda and Bill transitioned to another charitable foundation. And so I never assumed that they were still madly in love, or they weren't. It just seemed like they respected and liked each other, and they were in this good business together, except their new clients that never leave the house. Their charitable foundation work never ends. They can't just retire and buy a condo in an Airstream. So it got me thinking about their age. Bill Gates is 65. And when he was born, that was as long as Americans were expected to live. And now the average American male lives to about 78. I think it's a little more than that for women. The Gates will probably live to be 130.
Yeah.
Right.
And our higher life expectancy means there's more stuff you can do in retirement, which means there's more chance you're going to want to do something different from your spouse. And I think the pandemic has even more people thinking about their mortality and how they're going to go for it, whatever it is. So those are my Gates reactions.
Bill, you have thought this through. Well done. Yeah.
Yeah, that's some deep thinking that I really appreciate. And one thing I did think about this was this has been a year where so many people I know are making major life changes. They're changing jobs, they're moving cities because of the pandemic or whatever. They're getting together with new partners, splitting with their partner. I don't know what impact this year had on them, but I wonder if there was something, if there was some timing factor with, a year into the pandemic.
I also found myself wondering, how do relationships work if you're billionaires?
Oh,
I'm just thinking about how a lot of the time that I spend with my husband, we're putzing around the house, we're doing dishes, we're caring for our dog. Like, these are all just very normal people things. And I imagine that if you're a billionaire, maybe you have people to take care of that for you, but how often do you see each other? And how do those interactions work? And of course, only they know this, and I don't want to pry into their personal business, but one wonders, what that does to what a usual relationship looks like. And that seemed to be kind of where they started, right? Like when they met, they were not as wealthy as they are now. So
I feel like I would have to live 100,000 more years to truly answer that question. So, I'm not quite sure.
Well, their robots will be living that long.
Right.
Yes,
right.
Paige.
Yeah. Oh, my fluff question about this is, okay, if people sort of saw them as like Seattle royalty, who's the next Seattle royal couple? So it's in my mind.
Sue Bird and
Rapinoe,
and the soccer player Megan Rapinoe.
Yeah, I thought that.
I'll take that.
Listen, that divorce is not the most smile-worthy thing, and I always try to make sure we leave with something that you're smiling about this week. Any nominees?
I'll throw one out there if I may. I was super excited to see Highway 20 open this week, the North Cascades Highway. Always a good sign of spring. There was a great story in the Seattle Times about this. Ethel Clark, she used to run the Glacier Peak Resort there, would always hand out cinnamon buns in years past when the highway opened, would actually push open the gate herself. She's passed away, but her niece is now taking on the tradition, which I thought was really cool. So I was going to head up there, grab me a cinnamon bun, maybe light on the whiskey sauce. There's a lot of turns around there on Highway 20 and have a good time. It's time to get out.
I'm picturing Highway 20. Easy on the sauce. Okay. Yeah. Jane, what are you smiling at?
I, like I mentioned, am now fully vaccinated, and I browsed a bookstore for the first time since the pandemic occurred. So shout out to Third Place Books in Ravenna. They're letting people browse for 30 minutes. And just felt good to walk around and touch books and spend way too much money there. It was great.
So they time you. Each individual has 30 minutes.
It doesn't seem
honor system.
I think it's honor system, but I guess they're just trying to prevent there being like too many people in there at once. Because I could spend all day in there.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely.
That's
I've got something that made me smile this week, and it's a little odd, so bear with me here. But there's a new hotel. It's opening today in Kenmore. It's at St. Edward State Park.
Right.
This place started as a Catholic seminary in the 30s. And then it basically just became an abandoned building for decades. And they would shoot horror films there. And at one point, the caretakers were like living in the building, and there was like black stuff coming out of the walls, which apparently they learned was nicotine from the former seminary students. Anyway, they revamped the building. It's a hotel today.
Wow.
It's a hotel. And wasn't there some debate about what to do with it? I vaguely
there
remember
was.
this.
And I don't know the full history of the debate, but there were questions about what to do. And a developer said, we're going to turn it into a lodge and spa and farm to table restaurant. So
the photos look beautiful. It looks like
they
it's
do.
awesome. Yeah.
Well,
incredible.
I'm not going to bring up The Shining because this is a place to smile.
Indeed,
that was the whole idea. And I'm just smiling at the fact that all you got together with us this week and helped us figure out what happened, as we do on Week in Review. It's great to see you all on screen and someday in person. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having us, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
That's Brian Callanan, host and producer at Seattle Channel, and Jane C. Hu, independent journalist. Paige Browning is my fellow KUOWite, reporter, newscaster here with us. And we've been visible on YouTube and Facebook because of the social media and live streaming help we get from Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. This show is produced by Sarah Leibovitz and Shiraz Sadiq. And I'm looking forward to doing this again with you a week from today. So join us for the next Week in Review. Bye-bye, everybody.